particular the accident with the MAX train over on the band field, as well as the homicide in Cathedral Park, and identified, those are both North Precinct specific. I also identified kind of that time frame is during the graveyard shift, what we would call the night shift. And, my heart just goes out to these incidents. And what I realized, I was reading this over the weekend in this new role that I'm in, is I don't ever want to lose sight of the gravity of what we're talking about, the loss of life and the sanctity of life. And that oftentimes they can become, just this happened or this happened. And it really just, felt like, hey, I want to have a conversation about this a little bit with you folks and with the community and with the members of the Bureau. I went to North Precinct roll call last night at 10 o'clock to talk to the men and women who were out on those scenes and manage those calls on our behalf, just because I felt compelled to once again really challenge us to be transparent and accountable in all that we do. So some thoughts that I want to just pass along. First of all, recognize, for the families directly impacted that have lost a loved one, just that we grieve with them, and we're doing all that we can in our power to mitigate and minimize these events before they occur. Also, for the witnesses and the people involved, we're working closely with TriMet, for example, with the MAX line, but, obviously there's people on the train, witnesses that engage with us. We're very appreciative of that. We've provided our crisis response team as a form of support and emotional support, as well as helping to work through these difficult times. I'm going to be reaching out to the TriMet director today just to offer our condolences and our support. That's important to me, and recognize that, once again, as we talk about public safety, that it's a community effort, and by willing to engage, be a witness, be patient with our investigation, all of that demonstrates a community partnership that I'm proud of, and I'm thankful for those men and women for the Police Bureau, but also community members that worked collaboratively to resolve that incident. In regards to the homicide, it is our 51st, gun-related homicide of the year. We've had 60 total. Last year, I believe we had about 96. Is that correct, Mike? So we had 96 last year. So, we want to be able to recognize that we're trending in the right direction, but I don't take any loss of life lightly. And so I don't want us to be in a celebratory mode that the numbers are coming down when we still are seeing people dying to homicidal violence. And yet, even in that whole process, just once again, working with community, working with the victims' families, the detectives putting in, a significant amount of time to find a resolution. So all that to be said, just to make myself available this morning to let people know that we're engaged, that we are aware of these challenges. There is no panacea, immediate quick fix, but that I'm definitely committed to minimizing these incidents going forward and looking for strategies, both externally and internally, to do that. So that's kind of my opening remarks, and any thoughts or how that resonates with people, I'd like to hear from you.
Chief, looking at the TriMet incident, do we know why these pedestrians jumped onto the tracks or what they were trying to get from there?
No, the pros and cons of my role is I get, essentially very high-level overviews and stay out of the, some of the more minutia details, and then that becomes released as investigators are able to provide more information. So I don't, but I do know that, it was very, very difficult situation for a lot of people, a lot of trauma, very graphic from what I've been told, and very challenging scene to manage. And yet, once again, it sounds like everybody, including the community, really did the best they could to try and make it, so that we could come to a clear understanding, resolution of what happened, as it's an ongoing investigation.
The release mentioned,
No, go ahead.
The release mentioned speeding possibly before crash that happened on I-84, potentially grabbing a car part. As it relates to speeding, traffic deaths are on pace to surpass last year's.
Yes.
How is restaffing the traffic division going? Where are those numbers at?
Right. I should have brought those numbers with me. I actually looked at them this weekend because we are demonstrating, from where we didn't have anything, now we're demonstrating, increased DUI arrests, traffic enforcement. That's certainly an area of concern. And you're right, the trend that we're seeing in that is very, very disappointing. So looking at what the traffic division is and isn't doing is a priority. How do we evaluate their effectiveness? Are we deploying them in the right places, working on the right issues? But also, along my efforts around regional, cooperation and collaboration, I've had conversations with the state police superintendent about, maybe we can expand on some of the efforts that we're doing around fentanyl to include some traffic enforcement options. I mean, that's clearly their lane, so to speak, if I can use that pun. But really, working with state police and then working with Multnomah County and our other partners to try and just increase that presence. Traffic is for a long time, for many, many years, was our #1 community concern. When we did community surveys, people talked about traffic and speeding and things like that. And it was, a high priority and a point of emphasis. And of course, with all the other challenges, it's kind of gotten, maybe lessened. And now I think we're re-emphasizing the need for a proactive traffic approach. And it doesn't have to be, the final thing I'll say about that is I'm not a believer that it has to be solely enforcement based. Warnings, visibility, have a proven track record of slowing people down and limiting crashes. But we can get you the numbers exactly what's happened with the traffic division.
And traffic is just one piece. We also have the street racing missions we've done just last weekend.
That's true.
We did the mission impromptu mission that resulted in arrests and cars towed and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, I mean, the whole street racing thing is another conversation in terms of an anomaly. That's an anomaly, a uniqueness that's really risen over the last few years. So, the combination of being intentional on those acts, but then just day-to-day traffic. I mean, a lot of people on the road.
Looking at TriMet, we know there's been several challenges around TriMet stations in the last year. Obviously, that's Sheriff's Office plays a part there, and they have their own officers. Could PPB play more of a role looking at these incidents and working around the TriMet area?
Well, it's funny you'd mention that. I mean, we're having conversations literally today, the deputy chief is, with Multnomah County about some of those very things, particularly coming into the holiday season where we anticipate increased amount of travel on the trains and the buses for people to be out and about. So we're having that discussion as we speak. I don't know what it's going to look like. Everything comes down to resources, right? Time, money, people. That's when I say resources, that's what I mean. It's how much time do you have, how many people you have, how much money can you spend or can you afford to invest. So, but I have been really encouraged at the recent conversations with Sheriff Morrissey, with Travis Goldberg, the chief of Gresham, Jason Wallace at the port. All of us are very much unified in our approach and recognizing sort of the need in Multnomah County for a cohesive strategy where we support one another, because all of those trains and buses, they all travel through all our jurisdictions. So why not come together and figure out how can we maximize that versus trying to do it just as a one-off.
Looking at the Cathedral Park incident, I don't know if you'd be able to speak to this, but our producers were wondering today, does it seem like there's been an increase in shootings impacting women in the last year?
Boy, I haven't looked that closely. I can say that, for that particular incident, we don't anticipate any ongoing threat to the community. And that's about as much detail as I have in regards to that. But that would definitely be something to, we could take a look at and see those numbers.
A neighbor also said that she called 911 at about 4:45 a.m. and PPB responded around 5:32. She said it took about 50 minutes before she heard cops arrive. I'm wondering, do you know how long it took PPB to arrive at the scene and why it might have been delayed?
No, I don't have
look
that.
Up, Catalina. It was regards to the shooting, or was there maybe a disturbance ahead of time?
She called 911 about gunfire.
Gunfire.
At 4:45 a.m.
Okay.
I'll see if I can pull that log up and look at that.
Thank you.
I mean, if the response time is 45 minutes, what does it say? What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, response times to calls for service it's a really difficult measuring stick for all of us in this process. First of all, I want us to be able to get to the need as soon as possible. I mean, that just makes sense. That's common sense, right? We want to, especially high priority calls. But then there's a whole backstory about how calls are prioritized. I've been reaching out to Bob Causey, the Bureau Director of BOEC. How do we categorize them? How do we rank them? And then when they come in, how they're evaluated and interpreted by the sergeants and the officers. So something may come in at this priority level, but then when it's evaluated, looked at, it actually fits this priority level. We have such a volume of calls that we have to be able to have that discretion. So obviously, as Mike said, I don't know the circumstances here, but big picture, as the chief of police, my priority is that we be able to service folks when they call 911. the flip side of that is how do we, do so when we have a lot of calls for 911 that may or may not require a police response. And those obviously are downloaded and put into the system, and we have to work through those. So it's a real balancing act. The encouraging part is I do think we as a community are recognizing that, and we're finding alternatives, PS3s for the police bureau, Portland Street Response. I was coming in this morning, listening to the radio, and they had a call come out, and they had Portland Street Response coming on soon, and so, it's like, hey, they can manage this or whatever. So I think we're doing a better job of that, but really getting into 2024, working closely with Director Causey out there and BOEC, I think I think there's some space in there for us to be able to improve our call times and be more responsive, but there's some system issues there we have to work through to better understand it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and in both these instances, you said North Precinct is responding to both, an incident on Northeast 33rd all the way out to St. John's. The staffing and resources in that precinct, how do you assess that?
Yeah, we've certainly had plenty of conversation over the last few years about staffing and the need for more resources, more officers, and I'll continue to emphasize that, and I believe that we're on the right track. We have council support. We're seeing an increased amount of hiring over the last several months, which I'm very encouraged by that. We're seeing an increased amount of interest in people wanting to be police officers for the police bureau, which is great. But these are huge geographic areas, right? North Precinct stretches from St. John's, actually Linton, so across the St. John's Bridge out onto Highway 30. Well, it used to previously. I don't know, maybe that's changed. But anyway, it does go from St. John's all the way out to Park Rose, out on Sandy Boulevard. East Precinct starts at Cesar Chavez and goes clear out to 162nd, and of course Central Precinct from there all in. These are massive geographic areas that require, a significant amount of coverage, and for us to really be able to identify, okay, where are the areas we can be most effective? And when you're addressing calls for service, it's a little bit of a conundrum, because we know there are things that we could do downstream that would limit or reduce the number of calls for service. But we're so busy doing this that we can't get upstream to do that, right? So we can't get ahead of it because we're always doing this. So it's a tricky balance for me to figure out, yes, we have this immediacy in this response, but are there resources that we can apply over here to maybe make these fewer? And, what is the amount of time? What's the reasonable amount of time to allow for us to do that? If you're on the other, like right now, our calls for service time, I know that Mike's might cringe when I quote numbers off the top of my head, but, our calls for service, I think, for priority calls is probably around 18, 19 minutes for some priority calls. So, I don't know that's a fact. You'd have to check that out. But let's just say it's high, okay? You're on the other end of a 911 call, and you need services quickly, and I tell you, well, it's going to be an extra 30 seconds or a minute over the next 6 months because we're working on this problem, but we hope in the future you won't have this problem where you'll need us. You get where I'm going? And that's a pretty hard thing to tell somebody when in the immediacy they need that service right away, immediately. So we have to find a way to meet this demand, but we also have to find a way to get upstream so that we don't keep having this demand. That's the tension. I don't know if I explained that very well, but that's how I see it. It's like we have this immediacy, but we also have this long-term strategy to try and reduce that so we can be more effective in it. Does that help? Sorry, I kind of got on a tangent there, Mike. It's just really important to me that we demonstrate that we're engaged and listening and responding to the best of our ability. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to just be available to you today.
Anything else?
Yeah, 3 more questions about the homicide. Someone at the scene said that there were a few family members who were at Cathedral Park when the shooting happened. They said they heard between 10 and 15 gunshots.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds kind of like a domestic violence incident. Could you confirm whether any of that information is accurate?
I don't have any. That's more information than I have right now. I don't have those details.
Do you know when you anticipate releasing the identity of the victim?
I think probably in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
I know an autopsy, I believe, was being done like today. So. Anything else?
In the TriMet incident, do you know if drugs or alcohol played a role in the events leading up to being struck by the train?
No, no, I don't. Yeah. that just, like I said, when I read it, it just broke my heart, but also just thinking, man, that has such far-reaching implications in people's lives. I mean, it's pretty dramatic, so. All right?
Thank you.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate you guys making the time.